The phone rang at 3:47 a.m., its shrill cry slicing through the silence of her small apartment. Margaret sat bolt upright, her heart pounding as she reached for it with trembling hands. On the other end was Harold, her attorney, his voice tight and clipped. "Margaret," he said, almost hesitating before continuing, "I'm so sorry to wake you, but there's been a development." She didn't need him to finish. She already knew. 2 days ago, she had received an email from HR, a terse message informing her that after decades of loyal service, her pension payout would not be processed. Just like that. A lifetime of dedication erased by corporate bureaucracy. Her stomach churned as memories flooded back, late nights hunched over spreadsheets, missed birthdays and anniversaries, all sacrificed in the name of duty to a company that now treated her like yesterday's trash. Harold's words came rushing out then, filling the void left by her stunned silence. Something about clauses buried deep within contracts, legal loopholes they hadn't caught in time. But none of it mattered anymore. The damage was done. At 68 years old, with no savings to fall back on and health issues creeping up faster than expected, Margaret felt the floor drop out beneath her. This wasn't just money, it was her future, her security, everything she'd worked toward since she was 22 and fresh out of college. Margaret had joined the company when it was still a fledgling startup, barely more than a handful of desks crammed into a dingy office space. Back then, everyone wore multiple hats. She handled accounts payable one day and client relations the next. There were no titles, no corner offices, just a shared dream of building something extraordinary. And build they did. Over 46 years, the company grew into a global powerhouse, its name synonymous with innovation and success. Through it all, Margaret stayed, rising through the ranks until she became one of the most respected figures in the organization. But success brought change, and not always for the better. The original founders sold their shares long ago, replaced by suits who cared more about quarterly earnings than people. New policies rolled out each year, stripping away benefits and restructuring departments until what remained bore little resemblance to the company Margaret once loved. Still, she persevered, believing her loyalty would pay off in the end. After all, she'd signed a contract guaranteeing her pension, the golden parachute promised to those who devoted their lives to the company. Or so she thought. Now, sitting alone in her dimly lit kitchen, staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop screen, Margaret couldn't help but feel betrayed. How could this happen? All those years of sacrifice reduced to nothing because someone decided to exploit fine print hidden on page 47 of a document no one ever read fully. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. And yet, here she was. Across town, in a sleek high-rise overlooking the city skyline, Richard Kane paced his executive suite. As CEO of the company, he prided himself on being a man of action, decisive and unyielding. But tonight, sleep eluded him. He kept replaying the conversation with his legal team earlier that evening, their smug assurances that cutting Margaret's pension was justified, their casual dismissal of any potential backlash. It's business, they'd said. Nothing personal. But it was personal. For Richard, at least. He remembered Margaret well. She'd been there during the early days, working tirelessly alongside him when the odds seemed insurmountable. He owed her more than he could ever repay. Hell, the entire company owed her. Yet here he was, complicit in taking away the very thing she'd earned through blood, sweat, and tears. His mind wandered to the closet self, tucked away in the depths of a revised employee handbook distributed 5 years prior. No one had raised objections at the time. Why would they? Who reads every single word of these documents anyway? Certainly not Margaret, whose trust in the company ran bone deep. That trust made her vulnerable, and Richard exploited it without even realizing it. He poured himself another glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light as he swirled it absent-mindedly. Guilt gnawed at him, relentless and unforgiving. What kind of leader does this make me? He wondered. Was I too focused on profits, too eager to appease shareholders, that I forgot we're dealing with real people here? Real lives? Richard sighed heavily, sinking into his leather chair. Tomorrow morning, he'd have to face the board again, defend his decision, or lack thereof. They'd pat him on the back, congratulate him for trimming costs and boosting margins. But none of them would understand the weight pressing down on his shoulders tonight. None of them saw the look in Margaret's eyes when she walked out of his office yesterday, defeated and broken. Meanwhile, Margaret scrolled through old photos on her computer, seeking solace in memories of better times. There she was at 30, standing proudly beside her first major project, a campaign that doubled the company's revenue in 6 months. And there she was at 50, receiving an award for outstanding leadership, surrounded by colleagues who cheered louder than anyone else in the room. Those moments felt like lifetimes ago now, distant echoes of a life she barely recognized anymore. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she opened a blank document. Writing had always helped her process emotions, find clarity amidst chaos. Tonight, though, the words wouldn't come. Instead, anger bubbled to the surface, raw and unfiltered. Anger at the company for betraying her trust. Anger at herself for staying too long, for believing promises written in ink. Most of all, anger at Richard, for letting this happen under his watch. As dawn broke outside her window, casting soft golden light across the room, Margaret finally managed to type a single sentence: "They took everything from me." Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to keep going. If nothing else, she wanted the world to know what happened. Maybe then, others wouldn't suffer the same fate. At the same time, Richard arrived at the office, bleary-eyed and exhausted. His assistant greeted him with a stack of papers requiring his signature, but he waved her off. Right now, he needed answers. He called an emergency meeting with HR and legal, demanding they explain how such a catastrophic oversight occurred. Their explanations were technical, convoluted, excuses dressed up in corporate jargon. None of it satisfied him. Frustrated, Richard retreated to his private conference room, closing the door behind him. He pulled up Margaret's file on his tablet, scrolling through decades' worth of performance reviews, commendations, and promotions. Each entry painted a picture of a woman who gave her all to the company, expecting nothing in return except fairness and respect. Fairness and respect he failed to provide. A knock interrupted his thoughts. It was Eleanor, the head of communications, holding a copy of today's newspaper. "You should see this," she said quietly, handing it over. The headline screamed across the front page: "Corporate giant robs senior employee of $3.5 million pension days before payout." Richard's blood ran cold. Beneath the headline was a photograph of Margaret leaving the building yesterday, her expression stoic but unmistakably heartbroken. Below that, a quote attributed to her: "After 46 years of service, I never imagined they'd treat me like this. I gave them my life." The article went on to detail the controversy surrounding the pension cut, quoting experts who condemned the move as unethical and legally questionable. Public reaction was swift and scathing, with social media ablaze with outrage. Hashtags like #JusticeForMargaret and #CorporateGreed trended nationwide, amplifying calls for accountability. Richard felt sick. Not only had he wronged Margaret personally, but he'd also tarnished the company's reputation irreparably. Shareholders were already calling for his resignation, threatening lawsuits if the situation wasn't resolved immediately. The board scheduled an emergency meeting for later that afternoon, promising to discuss damage control measures. Yet none of that mattered to Richard. What haunted him most was the image of Margaret walking away, her dignity intact despite everything. She deserved better than this. Better than him. By midday, Margaret's story had gone viral. Reporters camped outside her apartment building, desperate for an interview. Friends and former colleagues reached out, offering support and solidarity. Even strangers sent messages of encouragement, sharing their own stories of corporate betrayal. For the first time in days, Margaret felt less alone. But with the attention came pressure. Activists urged her to sue the company, arguing she had a strong case for breach of contract and age discrimination. Others suggested organizing protests or launching a class action lawsuit on behalf of similarly affected employees. While part of her wanted to fight back, another part hesitated. Could she endure the scrutiny, the emotional toll of dragging this battle into the public eye? More importantly, did she have the strength to confront Richard again? As the hours ticked by, Margaret wrestled with these questions, torn between anger and exhaustion. One thing was certain: whatever path she chose, it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead promised challenges she couldn't yet imagine, but also opportunities to reclaim what was taken from her. And somewhere across the city, Richard watched the same news coverage unfold, knowing he'd have to make amends sooner or later. Whether Margaret would forgive him remained to be seen. The weight of the world seemed to settle on Richard's shoulders as he stared at the television screen in his office, replaying the news coverage of Margaret's story. Each mention of her name felt like a punch to the gut, each outraged comment from pundits and viewers like another layer of guilt piling onto him. He had always prided himself on being a leader who made tough decisions for the greater good, or so he told himself, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd crossed a line he could never uncross. He picked up his phone, scrolling through the endless stream of emails flooding his inbox. Most were angry messages from employees, clients, and even shareholders questioning how this could happen under his leadership. A few were thinly veiled threats from lawyers warning of impending legal action. But one email stood out, a message from Margaret herself. The subject line read simply, "We need to talk." Richard's heart sank as he opened it. Her words were measured calm, but carried an undertone of quiet fury that cut deeper than any public condemnation ever could. "Richard, I've spent the last 2 days trying to process what happened. I won't lie, it's been devastating. 46 years of my life poured into this company, only to be discarded without a second thought. I trusted you. I trusted all of you. And now, I don't know if I'll ever trust anyone again. I'm not writing this to beg or plead. I don't want your pity. What I do want is answers. You owe me that much. Call me when you're ready to explain why you let this happen. If you can look me in the eye and tell me it was worth destroying someone's life over, well, then maybe there's hope for both of us yet. Margaret." Richard reread the email 3 times, each word sinking in like a stone dropped into still water. She wasn't lashing out, wasn't screaming or demanding justice, at least not yet. This wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. And Richard knew she was right. He did owe her an explanation. Whether he could give her one that wouldn't sound hollow, even to his own ears, was another matter entirely. By the time Margaret arrived at the cafe downtown, she was already regretting agreeing to meet with Richard. Part of her wanted nothing more than to slam the door shut on this chapter of her life and move forward, however uncertain the future might be. But another part, the stubborn, resilient part, knew she couldn't walk away without confronting him face to face. Not after everything. She spotted him immediately when she walked in, sitting alone at a corner table with a cup of coffee untouched in front of him. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing than the larger-than-life figure she remembered from board meetings and corporate galas. His tie was loosened, his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair, and dark circles ringed his eyes. For the first time, she saw him not as the untouchable CEO but as a man weighed down by choices he couldn't undo. "Margaret," he said softly as she approached, standing awkwardly before pulling out a chair for her. His voice was heavy with shame, though he didn't try to mask it. "Thank you for coming." She sat down without responding, studying him carefully. Up close, the toll of the past few days was evident. Lines etched into his face that hadn't been there before, a weariness in his posture that spoke volumes. Still, sympathy wasn't something she was willing to offer, not yet. "I'll get straight to the point," she began, her tone clipped. "Why did you let this happen? Was it really worth it?" Richard flinched at the question, as if he'd been expecting anything but that blunt honesty. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," he admitted finally, running a hand through his hair. "When the legal team flagged the clause, I assumed it was standard procedure. No one mentioned your case specifically, they just said it would save millions in payouts across the board. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late." "That's not an excuse," Margaret shot back, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to stay composed. "You're the CEO, Richard. Nothing happens without your approval. Are you telling me you didn't bother to read the details? Or did you just choose not to care?" Her words hit him like a slap, and for a moment, he couldn't respond. Finally he sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. "I messed up, Margaret. There's no denying that. I got caught up in numbers and projections and forgot we're talking about people's lives. Yours most of all. I should have protected you, I should have done better." Margaret studied him silently, searching for any sign of insincerity. To his credit, he met her gaze head-on, unflinching despite the storm brewing in her eyes. It wasn't enough to absolve him, but it was a start. "You say you messed up," she said after a long pause. "But actions speak louder than words, Richard. What are you going to do to fix this?" Back at the office later that afternoon, Richard called an emergency meeting with his executive team. The room buzzed with tension as everyone took their seats, bracing themselves for what was sure to be a heated discussion. When Richard entered, his expression left no room for ambiguity. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a directive. "We're reversing the decision on Margaret's pension," he announced without preamble, cutting off the murmurs of protest before they could gain traction. "Effective immediately. Full reinstatement, retroactive to the original payout date. Any additional costs will come directly out of my bonus package." The room erupted into chaos. "Richard, you can't be serious," snapped Victoria, the CFO. "Do you have any idea what this will do to our bottom line?" "I don't care about the bottom line," Richard shot back, his voice sharp enough to silence the room. "This isn't about profits anymore. It's about doing the right thing. We screwed up, plain and simple. And now we're going to make it right." "But what about precedent?" argued Gregory, the general counsel. "If we reinstate hers, others will demand the same. Where does it end?" "It ends where it should have started, with integrity," Richard replied firmly. "Yes, it'll cost us. Yes, it'll mean tough conversations with shareholders. But I refuse to lead a company that values dollars over decency. If anyone disagrees, feel free to take it up with the board, and while you're at it, remind them exactly whose reputation is on the line here." For a moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, heads began to nod. Reluctantly, perhaps, but they understood. Richard had drawn a line in the sand, and there was no crossing it. That evening, Richard called Margaret personally to deliver the news. She listened in silence, her emotions unreadable even over the phone. "So that's it?" she asked finally. "Just like that?" "No," Richard corrected her. "Not just like that. It's the beginning of making things right, for you, and for anyone else we may have wronged along the way. I won't pretend this fixes everything, Margaret. But I hope it shows you that I'm committed to doing better. Starting now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice was softer, tinged with something that sounded almost like forgiveness. "I appreciate the gesture, Richard. Really, I do. But actions matter more than promises. Don't let this be the last step you take toward change. Prove to me, and to everyone else, that this company still has a soul." "I will," Richard vowed. "I promise." As he hung up the phone, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust took time, effort, and genuine commitment. But for the first time in days, Richard felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to turn things around. Months passed, and the ripple effects of Richard's decision to reinstate Margaret's pension, and address similar cases across the company, began to take shape. The initial backlash from shareholders was fierce, with calls for his resignation echoing in boardrooms and headlines alike. But as the story unfolded publicly, something unexpected happened. Public opinion shifted. Employees who had once felt invisible stepped forward, sharing their own stories of dedication and sacrifice within the company. Former colleagues rallied around Margaret, praising her resilience and using her case as a catalyst for broader conversations about corporate ethics and employee rights. Social media campaigns amplified these voices, turning what could have been a fleeting scandal into a movement for accountability and fairness in the workplace. Richard embraced this shift wholeheartedly. He didn't just stop at reversing the pension cuts, he spearheaded sweeping reforms throughout the organization. Contracts were rewritten with transparent language, eliminating buried clauses that could harm employees. A new advisory council was formed, composed of both senior leaders and rank-and-file workers, ensuring that decisions impacting staff would involve input from all levels of the company. Most importantly, Richard made it clear that profits would no longer come at the expense of people, a philosophy he championed in every meeting, interview, and speech. Margaret became an integral part of this transformation. Though she initially hesitated to re-engage with the company after everything that had happened, Richard personally invited her to join the advisory council. "You've earned the right to help shape the future of this place," he told her earnestly during one of their many follow-up conversations. "And frankly, we need your wisdom now more than ever." To his relief, and quiet pride, she accepted. Over time, Margaret found renewed purpose in mentoring younger employees, advocating for policies that prioritized work-life balance, mental health support, and equitable compensation. Her presence on the council wasn't just symbolic, it was transformative. She brought decades of experience and empathy to the table, challenging outdated practices and inspiring others to dream bigger for themselves and the company. The turning point came on a crisp autumn morning when the company hosted its annual gala, a lavish event typically reserved for celebrating financial milestones and executive achievements. This year, however, The theme was different: gratitude and renewal. As guests filled the grand ballroom, they were greeted not by charts showing revenue growth, but by heartfelt testimonials from employees whose lives had been touched by the recent changes. When Richard took the stage to deliver his keynote address, the room fell silent. Gone was the brash, profit-driven CEO of old. In his place stood a humbled leader who spoke with genuine emotion about lessons learned and promises kept. Tonight, he began, looking out at the sea of faces before him, we honor not just numbers or successes, but the people who make this company what it is. People like Margaret Hayes. At the mention of her name, the crowd erupted into applause as Margaret rose from her seat near the front of the room. Dressed in a striking emerald green dress, she walked gracefully to the stage, where Richard met her with an extended hand. Together, they stood side by side under the spotlight, a powerful image of reconciliation and unity. I won't lie to you, Margaret said into the microphone, her voice steady and strong. This past year has been one of the hardest of my life. But it has also been one of the most meaningful. Because through this experience, I've seen how much good can come from standing up for what's right, even when it feels impossible. And I've seen how much better we are when we choose compassion over convenience, integrity over indifference. Her words resonated deeply, earning a standing ovation that lasted long after she stepped away from the podium. That night, Margaret didn't just reclaim her dignity, she inspired countless others to believe in the possibility of change, not just within the company, but in themselves. In the months that followed, Margaret decided to retire officially, though she remained an active advocate for workplace reform. With her reinstated pension providing financial security, she traveled, wrote, and spoke at conferences, sharing her story as a testament to resilience and justice. Her memoir, 46 Years and Counting, became a bestseller, praised for its raw honesty and unwavering hope. As for Richard, he continued to lead the company with a renewed sense of purpose. Under his guidance, the organization flourished, not just financially, but culturally. Employee satisfaction soared, turnover plummeted, and the company earned accolades as one of the most ethical employers in the industry. When he eventually stepped down as CEO years later, it wasn't amid controversy or criticism, but with heartfelt tributes from those whose lives he'd helped transform, including Margaret herself. On the day of his retirement party, held in the same ballroom where they'd shared the stage years earlier, Margaret presented him with a simple yet poignant gift, a framed photo of the two of them from that night, smiling together beneath the spotlight. Beneath it, she'd written a short note. Thank you for listening. Thank you for changing. And thank you for proving that even the hardest mistakes can lead to something beautiful. Richard accepted the gift with tears in his eyes, knowing it represented far more than forgiveness, it symbolized redemption. And as the evening drew to a close, with laughter and music filling the air, Margaret slipped quietly out onto the balcony. Looking out over the glittering city skyline, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Life hadn't turned out exactly as she'd planned, but perhaps that was the beauty of it. Sometimes, the greatest victories come not from avoiding hardship, but from facing it head-on, and emerging stronger on the other side. With a contented smile, she raised her glass to the stars above. Cheers to second chances, she thought. Cheers to hope.